Welcome, everyone. Can you all hear me okay in the room? And in Zoom, can folks hear okay?
We can.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Before we get started, I just wanted to begin by acknowledging that we're gathering today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Lummi Nation and Nooksack tribe, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Thank you and welcome to everyone, folks in the class, folks on Zoom, and folks joining us in person. My name is Kate Darby. I'm a faculty member in environmental studies, and this quarter, our speaker series has focused on cross-disciplinary and multidisciplinary conversations. And when I decided I wanted to do that, the first thing I thought was, well, we have to do something special for Earth Week, and we should talk about what is the future of environmental governance on Earth Week, because I think that's something that many of us are thinking about quite a bit. And I reached out to the three folks sitting here next to me, and they all replied within 12 hours. So I'm so grateful to you all for being here and being willing to participate. I'm going to briefly introduce them and then let them each speak for 5 to 7-ish minutes about this prompt. What is the future of environmental governance? So Dr. Troy Abel on the end, Troy, give a wave, is a professor of urban and environmental policy and planning here at Western. Dr. Kendra Dupuy in the middle is a professor of political science here. And then Dr. Mark Neff is a professor of environmental studies. And Troy told me to give them an unprompted icebreaker. So I'm going to give you easy, favorite vegetable. So say your favorite vegetable and then pass it down, and I'll let Troy have the first set of words.
Okay, my favorite vegetable, I guess, would be a bell pepper.
Okay.
It's a fruit.
Well, that's cheating. Okay, I'm on that theme. I like a really good ripe tomato that is also a fruit. For vegetable, kale.
Is a jalapeno a vegetable? Oh, so broccoli. I'll go with broccoli. Okay, I have some prepared remarks for the question, what is the future of environmental governance? In the near term, it will be retraction and resistance, then recovery if we remember an overlooked lesson from Earth Day's first year. April 22nd was the least important political event of 1970. Next week, some of us will remember the 56th anniversary of 4 Dead in Ohio. It's when National Guard troops fired at unarmed anti-Vietnam protesters on Kent State University's campus. Troops killed 4 students and wounded 9. But Earth Day's organizers, led by Washingtonian Dennis Hayes, launched the first environmental politics campaign with a Dirty Dozen slogan. They identified 12 anti-environmental members of Congress for defeat. 7 months later, 7 of those 12 lost their congressional seats. Then, every Democrat and Republican in Congress and the Republican president at the time, Richard Nixon, became environmentalists. Dozens of environmental laws were passed. Republican President Ronald Reagan reauthorized 4 of them, got overridden by Congress with a veto on the Clean Water Act amendments, and signed 2 major environmental initiatives, the Coastal Barrier Resources Act of 1982 and the 1988 Montreal Protocol. Reagan also signed 38 bills, adding over 10.6 million acres to the National Wilderness Preservation System. But then, environmentalism and its governance influence at the federal level and among Republicans began dying. So the revival depends on us remembering and politicians facing political consequences for being anti-environmental. And that's up to us.
First, then.
Okay, so I thought I'd start by defining distinction between governance and government. So government is the nuts and bolts of our state and federal governments as you think of it, but governance is broader than that. It's those processes, those players, but also societal norms, conventions, behaviors, et cetera. So this is the future of environmental governance, which could potentially be broader than government action, formal government action. So going a little bit further back in history for background for the 1970s explosion of environmentally protective legislation. The economy grew substantially over the course of the 20th century, grew in size and in complexity. And Congress was always conflicted about empowering bureaucrats to help manage that expanding economy, but public demanded controls on environmental pollution, demanded increasingly a social safety net in the aftermath of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl era, et cetera. So there's public demand for government action of a Congress that was conflicted about expanding the scope and scale of government, right? So some of our founding myths are rejection of a disconnected remote government, that is Britain. So one of the compromises that came out of that was empowering technocratic governance within the administrative state. That means a lot of decisions were put in the hands of bureaucrats, and those bureaucrats were instructed to respond to scientific, best available information. That is legally mandated through legislation, through executive order, and it's kind of an emergent cultural norm as well. One of the things that happened coming out of the 1970s and in subsequent decades is it became clear as the scope and scale of scientific research expanded that science wasn't unitary. And there were increasingly scientific narratives that pointed in incompatible directions. Just one example, DDT that we all know as like one of the environmental atrocities that was regulated during the 1970s. Just months before the EPA banned it, the EPA published a report saying there is no cause for concern for human health or the environment. There were two narratives about DDT because the number and breadth of scientists who were engaging some of those toxicological questions expanded dramatically. Since that time, with the expansion of science and the advent of the internet, we now have access to so many different scientific narratives that the idea that we could remove politics from government decision-making by empowering bureaucrats to follow best available science is a myth. It is clear that it's a myth. So for me, when I think of the future of environmental governance, it's going to be a reinvigoration of true democracy to engage the trade-offs that are always at play, right? DDT, yes, it is an environmental, it's a damaging chemical. It had impacts on some of our treasured, especially birds of prey. It's found in breast milk in people all over the world, including in the far north and the Arctic. But it also battled back malaria meaningfully, where you used to be able to contract malaria all the way north of Washington, D.C. That is no longer a risk, right? So these chemicals that are so dangerous also had upsides. And in the future, as we have access to science that validates multiple incompatible narratives, we're going to have to experiment with how we do democracy more fully, more genuinely to engage with those trade-offs. I don't think we're going to learn to trust again bureaucrats to do that on our behalf. I think we're going to have to figure out how to more meaningfully engage as democracy.
Okay, well, I find prediction is always an imperfect science and very risky, and I'm not one to be in the poly markets and the prediction market. So, uh, this is a big question to think about, and this could go in a lot of different directions. So in some respects, the future of environmental governance will be what it always has been. So, like Mark here, I define governance as rules. So for me, governance is very much not only about government, which is an important component of environmental governance, but it's also about just basically the rules that we have, or what political scientists like to talk about, institutions for managing the use of environmental resources and also the effects of those uses. So the history of humanity is very much about environmental management, right? If you can't manage your environment, you basically see yourself out the door. And those groups who do manage to better manage their environmental resources have continued on or seen success. So in some respect, there will be rules, there will be governance, but the nature of that governance is probably going to change. And that could take a lot of different paths, but I do think it depends on the level that we're talking about. So we could talk about local level environmental governance, we could talk about national level environmental governance, we could talk about international level governance, and those are different things, and we're seeing different challenges to environmental rules and environmental management at each of those levels. And we could also talk about governance of what. So, that could be different types of environmental resources. It could be, things like the distributional costs and consequences, the trade-offs of the use of different environmental resources. So it depends a lot on the level we're talking about and what we're talking about. I agree with Troy here that certainly we're seeing retraction, we're seeing pushback. We're seeing this is an era of contentious politics. There's a lot of debate around the use of the competing uses for environmental resources, right? So we have economic values for certain resources, and we have other types of desires for how to use finite resources, and the trade-offs and the costs and the benefits are not the same for every group. So we're having a big debate about that at these different levels. And even though we've seen retraction of environmental rules and protections, we're seeing pushback against those pushbacks too. So yesterday I was reading in the paper that even in the Republican Party, there are some Republicans starting to push back against the proposals to retract some parts of the Endangered Species Act. So it's not, this is going to keep continuing, these debates around the rules and around governance. But we are losing faith in institutions, and that's always a dangerous moment for environmental management. So not to be too much of a Debbie Downer, it does depend on us, and very much a conversation about democracy and how do we manage as a society environmental resources. Yes, I don't know if I have a conclusive answer about the future. There will be a future. To be determined, I guess.
All right. I don't love the single microphone, but it does act as a nice talking stick, so we can't speak over each other. So I have some questions. We can take questions from the crowd. I wanted to ask if any one of you wanted to respond to anything anyone said so far before we start asking questions. Not yet. Okay, I have many questions. Do you all have any questions? Not yet. Yes.
You say it's democracy, but what should we be doing better specifically?
So just to repeat for the folks on Zoom, you asked what kind of action should individuals be taking as part of democracy?
I'm happy to answer that and then pass it down and see what other folks have to answer. Two things. Yes, absolutely. Engage, write letters, call your elected officials. And something else I think that we really have forgotten how to do as a nation in recent decades, talk to the people you disagree with and be open to learning. Not that you have to compromise your values, but one of the things that democracy as a system is designed to do is to identify steps forward that we can agree on being mutually beneficial, even if we don't agree what the goal is, right? So I might not agree with your environmental values, but via conversation about what we're striving for in the world, you and I might find agreement that this, whatever policy, is a step in the right direction, even if we don't agree what the ultimate direction is. And that's something that democracy can do that is a true strength. And to the extent that we don't engage each other across difference, that is lost.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of go off that. So definitely learning. So one thing is, being here at Western, but also, learning about people you disagree with or people whose actions might seem contradictory or, anti-environmentalist, and understanding, why people are, for instance, maybe protesting against or not wanting to, comply with actions that might help to mitigate climate change. And understanding that there are costs and trade-offs to every environmental action or every piece of environmental governance. So the more you understand about people that you find on the other side, I think the easier you'll be able to affect change, because you'll be able to understand those obstacles. And I would just say that, on the kind of theme of civic action, like there are lots of environmental groups in Whatcom County, locally, even here on campus, and even just going out and doing, joining a work party, every single small action counts. It may not seem like it, but the accumulation of many small actions can actually be big change. So I would encourage you to just, even if it's putting plants in your backyard or something small, like everything, I think everything matters. So you can affect change at an individual level for sure.
I'll reinforce what Professor Neff said. Talk to people that you don't agree with, but I would go a little bit further and ask you to try to find the things that you could agree on, the common values that you might share with very different people. And there's quite a bit of social science research on framing in values that we don't often think about in the environmental governance business, like public health. Air quality is really important to everybody's health and shouldn't. And so, and the health of your children, preventing them from getting asthma, could be a common value across folks of very different political stripes. So I would encourage you to do that, leave Bellingham, and figure out some common ground with folks you have disagreements with. Give me a hold on to it, and I'll take a question, and we'll go in reverse. Yes?
And they are unwilling to maybe have a conversation with you, but you want to find common ground.
Yeah, so the question for those on Zoom is, what is the course of action when you just simply can't find anything to agree on with someone? Or they are shutting you down? I suppose many of us have had this experience at family meals, maybe. And that laughter suggests that that's true. Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's a point at which trying to find something and being shut down regularly just, it's kind of becomes a waste of time. But what if you talked about something that you're not likely to disagree on, like, sports or some kind of hobbies or family histories. And so, and at a certain point, I do think we do kind of overestimate our ability to talk to everyone, even especially those we disagree with. And I think we have to find those that are willing to talk about different things, but also are willing to have a conversation. If they're not willing to have a conversation, it is probably not going to be very productive.
Okay, so I have maybe a more concrete example, and it touches on your point about framing. So I recently did two things. I joined a local club, the Rotary Club. I wanted to be virtuous. I'm trying to life 5.0, trying to be a little bit more virtuous in my life. And then I also had I had an ambition that I was going to learn to garden this quarter. Spring hit, and I was like, perfect. I have some yard, going to go out and learn how to master the soil. No, I'm not in a short amount of time. Janelle's over there. She knows my struggle with soil. Whoa, that's a real thing, people. So I bit off a little more than I could chew. But okay, hear me out. So I have green ambitions. They will happen someday, but in the short term. So I went to this presentation at the Rotary Club by a guy who is a fanatic about native plants. And this suddenly I realized, like, this is a big thing in Whatcom County, native plants. And I was like, what are you talking about, native? Isn't everything native? No. Okay, so he was like, look, it's really hard to talk to people about climate change. That's too political. But I can talk to them about native plants. So it was like he kind of pivoted. So native plants have lots of environmental benefits, lots of climate benefits, right? And so he was like, as soon as we got off the topic of climate change and the topic of, environmental politics, and just put the focus on, the benefits, the individual, I don't even know if he talked about like the societal benefits of native plants, but he just was like, everybody was on board. Who hates native plants? And so while I was very sad that politics had to disappear out of his conversations, because at the end of the day, politics is still there. We're not getting rid of it. But finding ways to, connect with people on potentially what seem like non-controversial things could be an opening, right? And then as those people get into, wow, native plants are cool and I can do that, like maybe their minds will be more open to talking about the political aspects of environmental issues. So hopefully that's some inspiration for you.
I really like both of those answers. Another thing I think that Dr. Dupuy already mentioned earlier on, just to reiterate, is engage in learning mode, right? You don't have to engage in a conversation about environmental topics in teaching mode. Ask what their motivations are, right? If it's someone who's opposed to climate action, ask what that's about, and you're likely to learn something that could inform your own thinking about what would make for viable climate policy, right? So a climate policy that comes at the cost of other people is a bad policy if we could do better. And if we learn from people who are opposed to proposals, you might learn how to thread the needle to accomplish climate goals and maybe job security goals at the same time. So engage in learning mode, and it changes the dynamic, and it's equally important, probably more so. And just another example of the engage topics where you can find common ground. I started teaching first at Allegheny College, small liberal arts college in Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is Rust Belt, small town, very Trump conservative. One of our good friends there was a communications professor who cares deeply about environmental and social justice. And she actually resigned her teaching position and started working to help reinvigorate the town's economy. And she started an investment club with deeply conservative people with whom she strongly disagrees on environmental and social issues. They have the common ground of caring for the well-being of the local economy. And they bring people together and share, like they invest together in local businesses, and they create these long-term relationships where they depend on each other. And that then is a structure that advances everyone's goals who's involved, and it creates long-term relationships where you're accountable to each other, and you have more capacity then to engage some of the areas where you disagree. You've built up the social capital with each other.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question to change directions a little bit. I want to make sure we talk a little bit about what's happening at the federal level in the United States, because I think that's on many people's minds. And there's many things happening and many things not happening. But one of the things that has happened during this current presidential administration is this removal of expertise, especially around the environment. from the federal government. And so I just want to hear more about what that means for environmental governance from your perspective. Is this a crisis? What should we make of this? Where do we go from here? And if any of you want to provide more context, feel free. Anybody want to start? It's a big question.
If I start, I'm going to say controversial things.
Great.
Okay, so caveats up front. What happened to many of these dedicated career civil servants is deeply problematic. These are people who had legal protections. They had dedicated their careers to the well-being of our society. I do not endorse letting these people go. Is it a travesty? It is on that level. I think we've made a fundamental mistake in our democracy over the last 50, 75 years in thinking that technical expertise can provide democratically legitimate decisions. That has not panned out. And so while I do not endorse letting these people go, I think we've leaned too heavily on the idea that expertise can give us correct answers. We've underplayed the processes of engaging with each other in a democracy to arrive at mutually agreeable steps forward. So I think it is simultaneously a travesty for those who were fired. It is a danger in that, like, they have substantial knowledge about the systems they study and about how government works. But it is also an opportunity to rethink the structures and processes by which we make decisions in the federal government, and to figure out how to do things in a way that has enough buy-in across the political diversity of our country that we don't go through this cycle every time the pendulum swings. And maybe we won't have quite as dramatic a pendulum swing if we do democracy better.
I'm not sure I can add a whole lot to this. So yes, scientists have been let go and institutions are being attacked, and that is a terrible thing. So, you know, I think that at some point there will be a backlash, right? We'll realize we need that expertise. Even folks like Trump and those in his administration will realize, like, for instance, if we want to go mine for critical minerals and metals, like, we're going to need scientific expertise. So I suspect, like you just said, there will be a pendulum back, although a lot of those folks have left or will have been doing other things. So yeah, we're going to have an expertise gap. But, you know, in managing environmental commons doesn't always have to depend on scientific expertise. There's a lot of evidence too that local folks know how to manage environmental commons, or environmental resources. So, hopefully the pendulum will swing back and we'll get some of that expertise back, and that we'll maintain some of it. And realize, maybe this is a moment too, we realize what that expertise means and what it will mean when it's gone, and that we'll have a greater appreciation for it when it does come back.
Yeah, it was a travesty to see so many EPA employees and friends of mine lose their careers. And but I also think there are a lot of non-scientists in the federal agencies that have lost their careers, because this is more than anti-science. It's combined with anti-government and an ideology. And I think probably many of you, if you ever imagined yourself working for the EPA, you probably have serious reservations about doing that in the future. And that's real damage to our democracy. And so I think it's a good question, and to think about what the long term and how maybe we do things differently. But I guess I'll maybe try to emphasize Professor Neff's point about doing something like science advisory boards differently instead of having. But I'll think of a regional example in the state of Washington. Coming back to the Commons, we have a co-management governance arrangement with tribes, the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, the 20 treaty tribes of the Pacific Northwest co-manage the fishery. What they don't co-manage, however, is our restoration activities. So we created a Puget Sound partnership. We have many colleagues who are scientific advisors to that body, and we're trying to recover the Puget Sound, and yet we are not doing co-restoration. We're only co-managing the fish. We're not co-managing the restoration. And that's where we can use this moment to acknowledge that maybe we over-invested in purely scientific expertise, and we have marginalized indigenous perspectives and indigenous practices that could actually help us govern better than we've done so far. Thinking about you, Virginia.
Talking stick.
Any questions from the room? Yes, right up there.
Shifting towards those co-management perspective and restoration specifically, how can we be a part of guiding towards that?
So the question was, how can we, the folks in this room, be part of guiding towards co-management practices?
Yeah, I think you have to be in the business of helping develop those mechanisms. First and foremost, just advocating for them with your voice that we need to be doing co-restoration. Introducing that to the political science conference if our abstract is accepted. Okay, good news. We are going to have a panel. And then trying to figure out how to do that. We've often said at this university sometimes that we're trying to prepare the leaders for the jobs that we don't know yet exist. So we invest a lot in liberal arts classes for you and diversity of perspectives and so forth, because we're pretty bad at predicting the future, as I guess I'll say social scientists might be enough of an umbrella for all of us. I think you can follow the example of the Allegheny friend of Professor Neff, who started a club to do that rather than waiting for government to do it or someone else. So that's one answer to think about how your future might do that. And great question.
I don't have a lot to add to that specific example, but rather to point to something more general and broad. And that is that after the Trump administration, there's very likely to be a political rebound in the other direction. There will be a lot of government process and institution rebuilding. I think there's a huge opportunity to learn from what has worked and what has not worked over the past 60 years of government. It would be a real shame to rebuild exactly what got torn down, because what got torn down was objectionable enough to enough Americans that Trump had political cover and encouragement to do so. So there's a huge opportunity to think through exactly what was missing from the status quo a year or 2 years ago, and build toward that, toward integrating the kinds of insights, the kinds of people, the kinds of communities that had been neglected.
I was curious how moving forward, if these gaps we need to fill and these government positions, if that presents opportunity for all these people are going to move on, but if that presents opportunity for younger people with the newer idea of kind of like interdisciplinary and working community to then be hired, and even if it takes 2 years for us to kind of get back up to that level, do you think that provides us an opportunity to just kind of like start over a little bit newer, in a better way?
So the question was, as there's an opportunity to rebuild, does that create space for young people, new ideas to be built into the institutions? I'll give a quick answer to that, and that is yes. If you look to the specifics of the history of the environmental movement, for example, Dr. Abel named some of the individuals involved who you can very directly point to their legacies in terms of the laws and structures that their thinking contributed to. Being even a low-level staffer in a political elected official's office creates space to advance new ideas, new proposals when the window of opportunity opens up. So absolutely. That's true in the political branches, and that's also going to be true in some of the administrative agencies where the agencies themselves will be rebuilding processes internally, and new ideas from new people absolutely can be built into that.
I guess I might also say that while we've seen this decimation at the federal level, certainly at the state level and in Washington state, we're maintaining a lot of these agencies and, pro-environmental positions and policies. So, lest you think everything has gone to hell. And yeah, there certainly will be opportunities for young folks to get involved. So, I think there is hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I would just reinforce what was said about that specific question, but I kind of want to come back to the co-management, co-restoration with our tribal neighbors. Something that someone told me once that I continue to try to remind myself is you shouldn't listen to respond, you should listen to understand, and that would come back to something that Professor Neff said. And I think that's particularly true in potentially collaborating or working on, in a co-restoration system with the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission and our tribal neighbors. And I think we're going to be opening our healing house soon, and there's going to be lots of programming there for all of you to engage with and learn more about tribal perspectives and to listen to understand. That seems like a great space for you to do that, and that could be part of setting yourself up for making sure you're bringing in new ideas when you step into those positions that will be part of the rebuild. I'll take the next question and then we'll reverse it. Yeah. Oh, you want to? Okay. Please. Yes. Let's not forget our privilege.
A former colleague used to say, I'm taking a point of privilege. So I'm taking a point of privilege. So we've been talking about potential rebuilding at the federal level. And so imagining some kind of rebuilding reconception phase, what do you want to stay gone? We were working with environmental policies that were established in the 1970s, and really, were tweaked around the edges, but really these were policies established in the 1970s. And here we are, 50 plus years later. What would you be happy to just let go from that era, and what would you want to maintain? That's a hard question, and I didn't give it to them ahead of time.
I'm going to cleverly dodge and answer adjacent. What I would like to see go is the notion that there are black and white, right and wrong answers in the space of environmental policy. There are not. Anything we do that is protective of, for example, even one endangered species comes at the cost of others. And there's some dramatic examples that are kind of shocking to the mind. Spotted owls are an endangered species. They are deeply threatened. Their territory is greatly reduced. There are very few of them. I've never seen one. I've never heard one. One of the major threats to them is an encroaching non-native invasive species, the barred owl, that outcompetes them and interbreeds with them. So to protect spotted owls in some areas, Fish and Wildlife Service is shooting barred owls, which do very well in the current ecosystems of the Pacific Northwest. So there are always trade-offs. And to the extent that we accept the notion that there's an environmentally right way of doing things and an environmentally wrong way of doing things, we're papering over all of the reasons why these things end up being controversial. There is no right way to do right by climate change. There are trade-offs. There is no right way to do right by pesticides. There are trade-offs. And I'd like to see the notion of easy binaries be one of the casualties of this era.
I don't know that I have a straightforward answer either. I'm not an American politics specialist or an American environmentalist specialist, but I will say that just my kind of anecdotal reading and understanding of environmental challenges in this country is that we need better policies to help us meet the challenges of today. So wildfire management, water management, and I'm going to claim ignorance on like the policies in terms of whether those are gone and, you know, a result of federal management. We also have a very fragmented environmental landscape in this country. So as opposed to other countries that have a bit more of unified structure, we have many different, our environmental governance and policies are across many different agencies and institutions. And there may be an opportunity there to build something that's a little bit more coherent. So yeah, so maybe the institutional landscape, there's an opportunity to build something there.
Great question, and I'm going to say something very controversial. But I'd like to see the Puget Sound Partnership go away. It's a scientific body that's been in charge of governing the restoration of the Puget Sound, and by any accounts, it's failed. Wild salmon continue to decline, and you know, what did Einstein say about crazy? It's doing the same thing over and over again and thinking you'll get a different result. Man, that's a really dangerous response, but there it is.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
Okay, right in lipstick on the mirror. Just kidding. Sorry. NEPA. I want to see NEPA go. National Environmental Policy Act. I think some of the authors of it thought this was going to have real teeth. This is going to steer the government toward environmentally beneficial policies. It doesn't. This is a paperwork production act. I should be really careful when I advocate this. It employs many, many of our graduate students doing inane, ultimately unhelpful work. Writing environmental impact statements. It's a tool that has been very powerful in stopping new facilities from being built by drowning people in paperwork and slowing down permitting to where like projects just become financially not viable because they take too long to get started. Great if you're stopping a dangerous smokestack. Less good if you're stopping the energy infrastructure that is going to be the energy revolution that brings us wind and solar power and the grid to deliver it to our houses. And the truth is, everyone has the capacity to use NEPA to stop projects, and it is used every bit as well, probably even more enthusiastically now, by the status quo industrial players to stop their competitors, as in clean energy projects, from gaining ground. So I'd be happy to see NEPA go. It makes any energy transformation project so expensive.
Okay, we're tearing everything down. I'm going to ask them to rebuild in a second, but does anyone else in the room have a question? Tosh?
In the role of like environmental governance in the future and looking at kind of the failures today at the national level, it's easy to blame the other side of the aisle and be really frustrated about the way things are going, but do you think there's a level of accountability to be had for us as people who are environmentally centered and the way that we communicate the things we care about and the way that
Okay, so this was, I'll try to summarize your question. A question about how students can sort of enter this world at this moment. Is that fair to say, Tosh, and communicate what's going on and engage? Is that fair?
I don't know if this answers. I'm going to try. I'm going to say that a lot of what we've talked about is on the national scale. Dr. Dupuy earlier on made a comment that that's not the only scale that matters. I really would encourage you all to engage in your communities at whatever scale to encourage some, I don't know, I would love to see more humility in the way we engage these controversies as a nation. So engage in your friendship circles more often in learning mode and demonstrate that you're learning from people you disagree with. I would encourage you go engage maybe in employment, working at the city, at the county level, and propose new processes for making decisions that might take into account differing points of view. There's changing federal process is unbelievably difficult, right? We've really not changed much in 50 years for how we govern the environment. It's hard, it's slow, it's deeply polarized. You can do a lot of the same work at the more local scale, and those are demonstration projects that show higher levels of organization what can work. So build from the ground up, build in communities, build in your institution as a university, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Join something local. I mean, we've got lots of local groups here to take action.
Yeah. So I think a Supreme Court justice called our states 50 laboratories of democracy. We have 3,000 counties, a little bit more than that in the United States. So there's 3,000 more laboratories of democracy. So I do like this demonstration idea as you engage in your communities, in projects, in processes that exist already and trying to help change them or to create new ones. I think there's a level of entrepreneurship that some of you have an opportunity to push the frontier on in rethinking, much like we heard the example from Allegheny County, creating new venues that address some of these issues in innovative ways.
We're so civil as we pass it back.
I know. So we are actually almost out of time. So I wanted to let you all leave us. I'll let you choose. Either leave us with something that you've been reading lately that you might recommend to others, or an example from your work that you find inspirational or you think students might be wanting to learn more about that might give a little bit of hope. And if you don't want to be hopeful, that's okay. You can go back to Debbie Downer.
Read up on deliberative democracy. Take some of my classes where we talk about it. It is really inspiring what people can do across difference. It will restore hope. It will restore a sense of purpose in democracy. So just Google it, deliberative democracy. It's happening a bunch of places, a bunch of different scales.
Okay, two things. So I'm teaching an environmental course this quarter, and folks yesterday were required to read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Go read it. Think about it in terms of framing, call to action. Like, that was a super effective piece of work in leading up to Earth Day. So go read that and get inspired and think about how that really worked. I'm also reading this book called The Republican Reversal, and it's about how the Republican Party, which used to be very, well, fairly pro-environment, helped to set up the EPA and other legislation, how they made this, what they call this book, The Republican Reversal, a complete turnaround. So in terms of understanding the other side and why they, yeah, the other side when you're trying to advocate for things, it could be a useful book for you. So
I'll recommend Robin Kimmermer's less famous book, The Story of Moss, and I'm probably getting that title wrong. But yeah, Gathering Moss, thank you. And Native American and environmental science biologist. So as she says in her more famous book, Braiding Sweetgrass, braiding science, spirit, and story. And that has just been a font of inspiration to rival Carson Silent Spring for me in much of my teaching. And I think Gathering Moss is a less appreciated work of hers.
All right, will you all join me in thanking Professors Abel, Dupuy, and Knapp? Thank you. And just a quick plug for the next 2 weeks. Next week, we have a panel of College of the Environment alumni, so that should be great fun. And then the following week, we have a panel on gender, sex, and vulnerability. So join us for that. Thank you all.